Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the second meeting in 2024 of the Scottish Commission for Public Audit. The first item on the agenda is to agree to take agenda item 3 in private. Are we all agreed? Thank you, we're all agreed. Our next agenda item today is to take evidence on Audit Scotland's budget proposal for 25-26, and members can find a copy of the budget proposal along with the covering letter from the Auditor General in paper 1 of their meeting papers. So welcome to the meeting Stephen Boyle, Auditor General for Scotland, Colin Crosbie, Chair of the Board of Audit Scotland, and I'd like to welcome Colin to his first meeting as Chair, Vicky Bibby, Chief Operating Officer, Martin Walker, Director of Corporate Support, and Stuart Dennis, Corporate Finance Manager, Audit Scotland. I would like first to invite Colin Crosbie and then the Auditor General to make short introductory statements.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to everybody for your time today. As the Chair has pointed out, I've recently been appointed to the post of Chair of Audit Scotland, and this is obviously my first formal meeting with the Commission, so I look forward to talking with you today and to working to you all over the coming years. As with all public bodies and services, we are operating in the context of significant challenges and risks. And the fiscal environment is the most difficult it has been for decades. Put simply, public services are not sustainable without major reforms to the financial structures behind them and the ways in which they are delivered. At the same time, the demands on and regulatory expectations of audit are increasing. As a knock-on effect, for example, Britain's corporate sector has seen audit fees almost double over the past 7 years, and the English local government bodies are facing a 9.5% rise this year, after an increase of 150% 2 years ago. In this context, it's crucial that Audit Scotland delivers in 3 key areas. The first is delivering high-quality independent audit that provides assurance about public spending and probity, gives insights that drive improvement, and acts as an early warning system about emerging problems. The second is to ensure the effectiveness of public audit, not just now but in the long term. That way we can sustain a high-quality service that adds maximum value to and positively affects the outcomes and experiences of all Scotland's people. The third is to show leadership and play our part in the face of the financial challenges. This means making sure we're efficient and using our publicly funded resources as prudently and as effectively as possible. Our budget proposal seeks to strike a careful balance between enabling us to modernise, as we must, to continually improve and to maintain quality, whilst also managing risks and delivering efficiencies and savings where we can. My closing comment, Chair and members, is that this proposal and everything that makes up this proposal has undergone significant scrutiny from Audit Scotland's internal systems and by my board during its development. I hope you can see that rigour. I hope you can see the rigour that's in it, and I look forward to your questions and discussions today. I'll hand over to Stephen as Accountable Officer for Audit Scotland.
Many thanks, Colin. Good morning, Chair. Good morning, members. Over the past year in Audit Scotland, we've delivered annual audits of almost 300 public sector entities in Scotland, as well as performance audits on matters of significant public interest. Through our quality assurance regime, we know that we've continued to deliver high-quality work, whilst also improving our performance as an organisation. We've made significant progress in our multi-year programme to recover the timeliness of our audit delivery that was interrupted as a result of the pandemic. Chair, none of this, though, is straightforward, and as ever, I would like to express my thanks to all my colleagues in Audit Scotland for their hard work, and equally to the colleagues who work in the audit firms with which Audit Scotland contracts with. Colin has spoken about the need for balance that we look to achieve through this budget proposal to you this morning. I hope that you can see from our submission, and hopefully also through this morning's discussion, that we can assure you and provide insights on how we plan to modernise how we deliver public audit so that it is fit for the future while continuing to deliver efficient and high-quality public audit. Chair, you'll see from our submission that our resource requirement for 2025-26 is £14.6 million, an increase of £1.4 million. There are three key elements to this that are our core costs, increased employer national insurance contributions, and the funding that we are looking for from the Commission to support our audit modernisation software. In this proposal, we have managed to contain the rise in our core costs to 1.4%. And that's against a context that came out yesterday of UK inflation levels of 2.6%, together with our planned 3.8% pay awards in 2024-25 and a 4.2% uplift in our costs with the contract that we have with audit firms. A significant part of achieving this is through a £2 million in efficiencies and savings by closely managing our costs and making strategic decisions in areas such as our office estate. Chair, as with all employers, we've had to quickly assess the impact of the recently announced increase in national insurance contributions. Through this budget, we are asking for the Parliament's assistance in meeting this unanticipated additional expenditure. Thirdly, as members will know, we are modernising how we deliver public audit in Scotland. A key step in this will be the procurement of new audit software during 25-26. Modernisation is a crucial element ensuring that public audit is effective and sustainable in the longer term. And by investing now, we will reap both efficiencies and improvements in the medium and longer term. Our audit modernisation proposal reflects a programme of work in this area that has started over the past 18 months. As Colin has mentioned, there is an onus on us to reflect the challenges that the wider public sector in Scotland has in addressing fiscal pressures. We think our proposal does this by looking at every area of our organisation where we can deliver those efficiencies, but also maintaining high quality and modernising. Lastly, achieving this, Chair, means that in this budget proposal, we are looking to accept a higher level of risk than we perhaps have done so in previous years. We are clear that there are mitigations and approaches to these risks, but we think that's the right approach and one that all public bodies are grappling with. Chair, as our own Chair says, we very much look forward to the discussion that we have with the Commission this morning and answering your questions. Thank you.
Thank you for those opening statements. I'm going to open up now to members for questions, and perhaps I can bring Mark Ruskell in first.
Thank you. Good morning to you. I wanted to ask you about productivity, and particularly in relation to the move from a 37-hour week to a 35-hour week. And I suppose it's a bit of a chicken and egg question because, you know, have you been able to increase productivity to the point that you feel comfortable reducing working hours to 35-hour week? Or actually are you thinking, well, a reduction into a 35-hour week will actually enhance productivity to the point that, you know, it's beneficial for your work in the organisation? So I'm just interested to know about your decision-making in that space and its relationship with productivity more generally. So.
Yeah, that's a very important area. Actually, you'll see that peppered throughout our submission. Our approach to both productivity and the dynamic that move to the 35-hour week. I'll certainly bring Vicky in a moment, who has led much of the engagement that we've had with our trade union partners in arriving at this proposal. I think productivity, first of all, maybe speak of that in perhaps more general terms. Our productivity is not a nebulous factor. I think it's reflected in our results. We're seeing an increase in our audit delivery timescales, and indeed Martin might want to set some of that out for the Commission as we're progressing through recovery of audit deliverables. So all of our NHS audits are on time, almost all of our central government audits, and we're recovering at pace both our local government audit delivery in terms of our financial audits too. Vicky can certainly say more, Mr Ruskell, in terms of the 35-hour working week. And it is going to be a change of how we operate as an organisation. That is true. If we distill it in some respects, though, it equates to 15 minutes a day for colleagues to change how we operate. And given it's a very clear matter of significant importance for our colleagues, our trade unions, in terms of their requirements of us as an employer, and mirrors, I think, the move that many organisations are taking, the Scottish Government, indeed the Parliament in due course, we understand too, is that it's an important accommodation and right that we kind of strike the right balance between the terms and conditions that we offer our colleagues, but also how that then translates into productivity as well. But certainly I'll bring Vicky in because she has been involved closely in this.
Vicky, if you could say how this relates to the staff survey work as well, and if there are a package of other measures around this that perhaps fit with that 35-hour week, and what the impact of that you think will be on the organisation going forward.
Thank you. So it's quite a complex dynamic that I think we're very alive to looking at, and I'll bring in a couple of points to hopefully cover what you're looking for. So we started off we were on a 36 and a quarter week, so we're not moving from 37 to 35. We were already at 36 and a quarter. And the 35-hour working week would come in at the 1st of April. In our pay negotiations with the unions were very clear, so it was a red line, that they wouldn't agree a pay deal with us without introducing the 35-hour working week. So that was something that we very much wanted to work with the unions on delivering, but it was a key factor for them in our pay negotiations. And we think we've negotiated a very fair package for our workforce. But on that, and through our discussions, it was also to be cost neutral. We could not be in the environment of increasing our staff numbers to accommodate those loss of hours. So it did require quite a lot of discussion internally about how that was actually going to be delivered. Because when I say it's a complex dynamic, we are also in the environment of recovering our audit delivery timescales, and we've got to think of well-being with staff as well. And the purpose of the 35-hour working week is to increase staff well-being, give staff more time, and therefore, in discussion with the unions, about increasing productivity. So I think we're just going to have to very carefully watch what happens. That's the position that we're taking. We're not bringing any extra staff. It's to, as Stephen says, it's 15 minutes a day. So we're looking at measures of, simple measures by saying, if you've got an hour's team meeting, could you make it a 50-minute and focus some rigour around some ways of working that could help manage that? But equally, we need to look at what that looks like for staff. We do operate a flexi system where we see if there's any extra hours, and we will closely monitor that, because what we don't want is, on one side, we've got 35-hour working week, but staff balances are increasing on the flexi side to just move. So this is something that we're working closely with HR, the unions, to be monitoring, and I think we will just need to see how that manifests. We're feeling positive about it. We think we're approaching it and that it's a good thing. It's what our staff, the unions, were looking for to increase well-being, and that's the spirit in which we're entering. But we will be closely monitoring and don't want to be complacent.
Okay, that's useful answer. I mean, as you say, it's quite a marginal change. It's 15 minutes a day. My own team in Parliament operates a 30-hour week. It does put a lot of pressure on productivity during that time. But I'm just wondering how that and a package of other measures may impact on your recruitment and retention going forward. So you're projecting now a 5% vacancy rate. Is it difficult for you to pin down what that vacancy rate will be going forward? Are you working towards bringing that down? Are you working towards an outcome where you're more competitive? And perhaps it might be difficult to match salaries within the private sector, but what's the attractive package? I mean, I suppose if you're looking at this and thinking, well, okay, I've got caring responsibilities, 35 hours a week, better than 37, but it's not 32. It's not taking half an hour off of each day to enable you to pick up the kids or, go and see an elderly parent. So I'm thinking about, for those people who are making career choices, to go with you rather than the private sector, bring down that vacancy rate, is this competitive alongside other actions that you're taking, and how does that impact your budget? It's a bit holistic question, but
So I'll maybe start. I'm sure Vicky will want to contribute as well. I don't think I'd want to underplay. There is risk in this for us as an organisation, and and benefits too. So, as Vicky mentions, our trade unions were absolutely clear how important this was in terms of staff well-being, primarily giving people the ability to juggle multiple responsibilities that they'll have in their life beyond working in we hope is a satisfying, dynamic place to work in Audit Scotland. The vacancy factor, you'll see from our proposal, we've increased that to 5% this year. And we've had engagement with the Commission on that over the past couple of years about what is the right level for us. So that generates, on the face of it, at the start of the proposal, an efficiency saving. And, and not an insignificant one, so, about £1.2 million that moving to a 5% vacancy factor gives us. But we've got to deliver it, is the point. So we're bringing in some new arrangements to support the delivery of that vacancy factor, what we're calling a recruitment board. And being absolutely clear is that to meet that vacancy factor, that's going to involve a degree of slowing down of the pace with which we will fill vacancies. And some of it might just happen organically. So a lot of the people that we recruit will be on a 3-month notice period. And there's never an equal sinking of when somebody leaves and works the notice period for Audit Scotland and bringing somebody else in. So that'll be one factor to manage. I think broadly, Mr. Ruskell, we feel that we are competitive in terms of the totality of the package that we offer people who work with us. Our turnover rates aren't historically high, and we are still able to bring in people at all levels of grades in the organisation. So, through from the executive team and a successful trainee package. So, typically we do not compete in pure financial terms with what somebody might be able to earn in the private sector. But we think with a shorter working week, together with the flexible working that Vicky mentions, and offers in terms of a significant public sector pension that we provide. These are now very rare in terms of defined benefit scheme in the private sector. We think we've got the right balance of reward package that we can offer that can help us deliver that, both that vacancy factor, but also more fundamentally that we can still be an attractive place for people to stay working with us and join in the years to come. I don't know if anything you want to add, Vicky.
I think Stephen's covered all the key points that I would have made. Maybe just one to add is work closely with the other audit agencies across the UK in terms of their packages and any sort of recruitment issues they might have. And the environment has been very competitive. I think relatively we are in a good place in Scotland. I think our package is competitive, but equally we don't want to be complacent on that, so we're always keeping an eye out. We're doing a lot of work on our future target operating model. We're looking at bringing in more graduates. We're pivoting around our school leavers programme, our modern apprentice programme, with an eye to the future, so continually looking, benchmarking against the private sector, other public sector in Scotland, but also at the UK level.
Okay. So just staying with productivity then, I mean, you've identified one, relatively minor sort of best practice change within the organisation around time and stuff. But I'm just wondering, are there further actions that you're going to be taking in the next year to improve efficiency and productivity? And I should say, we'll come to questions around the audit modernisation project specifically later on. But is there anything else in that area of productivity and efficiency you can point to that you're working on that's benefiting staff and helping them to do their jobs?
Yes, Vicky again might want to say more, and even Martin perhaps also. We are working to targets, I think, is the main thing. So we're also benefiting from now moving into the third year of this audit appointment cycle. And that, I suppose, by dint of some of the cyclical nature, as auditors become more familiar with these public bodies, there is an efficiency that we see typically, Mr. Ruskell. So that will bring benefits in terms of both the pace of delivery, but also obviously the depth and quality of reporting and findings that auditors make too. The pace one's the most fundamental though, and the Commission will be familiar with Audit Scotland's phased recovery programme from the disruptive effect that the pandemic caused the delivery of both financial and performance audits. You'll maybe recall from what now 4 years ago that we paused the performance audit programme. The timeliness with which we were able to deliver financial audits was severely impacted. So we're on the right path with that. I'll say one thing before passing to Vicky is that the audit modernisation is going to be fundamental, but it's not the only factor. We are continuing to invest in learning and development for our colleagues that has a natural benefit in terms of productivity. So our targets are there, very keen to chat through, and I think for me those are the headlines that are bringing the investment that we're making in our colleagues and then seeing the throughput outturn from it.
So just to add to that, one of the key factors for us measuring productivity is our improvement project we've got on our resourcing model and bringing in new software to allocate resources to audits, but also know the costs of audit and looking at that right across the organisation. So that is a key function for us to be able to have the real data at each level within the organisation, set productivity targets for each level and really knowing the true cost of each audit. At the moment, our data is not as robust. Or we've got the data, but it requires a lot of manual interventions to give us that information. So we've got quite a lag and we're not getting real-time data. So that's a key part to give us that investment, to give us that better idea around productivity. And once we've got that, we're also working on a project, again, particularly with the National Audit Office, about their levels of productivity to just be benchmarking to see where we are, that we are at the, we're challenging of where we are on that right level. One of the things around productivity as well is really with our impact reporting and our work planning. The Auditor General and also the Accounts Commission with the team are regularly reviewing more so on the performance audit side of pieces of work that are going to have the most impact. And we've really got that keen eye of working on a certain project will have an opportunity cost of not doing something else. So we're really bringing in cost information to all the audits we're doing to really have all that data to be deciding around productivity and impact.
Okay. I wonder if I might bring Colin in actually, because perhaps Colin mentioned his opening remarks about the scrutiny with which the board provides to productivity. So this is a regular feature, and I suppose maybe rather than me trying to persuade you that we're focused on productivity, perhaps the chair might want to do that.
No, thank you. I'm glad you think my powers of persuasion will be bigger than yours, but I mean, leaving that aside, I think there's some interesting bits about productivity, and Vicky's commented upon the better data that's sought through the resource and management information software, which is going to go in the next short while. The board are actually, funnily enough, as vexed about productivity as your question would indicate that the committee is. And the interesting bit about that is there's a perception that, you know, in the way that one speaks, is that somebody comes in and starts auditing at 9 o'clock and finishes at the end of the day. But actually, if you then take into meetings and training and all that kind of stuff, which is really essentially non-audit work, but it's nonetheless work, the board is seeking more and more clarity as to how efficient is our training. And we may have allocated 18 days, but could that all be done in 15 days if we trained in a different way? And similarly, in terms of meetings, can they be shorter? Does everybody who's at a meeting have to be at that meeting? Can we make this shorter and sharper? And I think that's where we're trying to see, for those members of staff who are at the coalface in terms of doing the work, are they getting the appropriate support to maximise effectively the time they're spending on the sort of productivity I think that you're referring to in terms of it, and what support can we put in terms of better streamlining the other processes? And I think that's work in progress. But certainly I know the Colleagues, in terms of the chair of the Accounts Commission and the chair of the HR committee, the REMCO, are very, very hot on this subject because they just see there's scope to improve that further. So 15 minutes might well be a challenge, but we're actually looking for rather more than that in the terms of amount of time that can be driven towards the job.
Sure, sure. That'll obviously benefit staff as well. Yeah. Okay, thanks. Yeah. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, let me bring Jamie Green.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning to our panel. I'm going to ask my set of questions in 2 tranches, you'll be relieved to know, so I might come back in later on the second tranche. The first area I would like to cover, though, is basically people. It is people, you know, audit work is about people at the end of the day, as much as we talk about automation and software. Let's look at some of your numbers. I'm looking at page 12 of your budget page, which sort of summarises your position on costs. So you're proposing that your people costs for this year will be 25.8 million in 25-26. Just to give me an idea of how you perform against budget expectations, can you let me know what last year's budget is likely to result in people costs? So what I'm looking for is what you thought you would spend on people in 24-25 versus what you expect to. Just to give me an idea of how on track you are with these budgets. Yeah,
very, very happy to. I might ask Stuart just to share with the Commission the precise detail that we're just in the fact we did a session with our colleagues yesterday on our forecast. I think as we move into Q4 of our financial year at the start of January, focusing really carefully, and so there will be a degree of estimation, I suppose, of some numbers that we might share with you about where we think we're going to land, and Stuart can set out if we have that detail with us this morning. Last thing I would say about it is you're right about your overall premise, Mr. Green, that people costs are the driver for Audit Scotland. So that 67% of costs are for people, and that doesn't include inevitably the work that's carried out by firms on our behalf. So 20% of the remaining costs are for firms, and that's from people as well. So getting that right is fundamental. But I'll bring Stuart in just to kind of track the extent to which we're on target.
Thank you. Yeah. Good morning, everyone. Yes, the people cost for 24-25, as you'll see on the table you're referring to, at 24.6 million. The current projection, based on information that we have, is that we will have an underspend in the region of 300,000 against that. So that is the current projection. Obviously, we've still got another three months to go in there, and that can reflect turnover from that. So it could get a bit higher, but that's what we're working on, is a 300,000 underspend there.
So that when was this 24.6 adjusted, and how does that match up versus what you had forecast at the beginning of the financial year to spend on people?
The 24.6 is exactly the same that was put to the Commission this time last year. Right. So there's no real change in the people cost budget there. The column there says adjusted, but that's mainly to take into account the adjustments required for leasing and things. So it sort of becomes more of a transparent process that you can compare like we like. But the people costs didn't change. Okay,
and presumably that any underspend in people costs, you're at the end of the financial year, that's it. There's no rolling over of budget, for example, on people.
No. We have no provision to retain any underspends from one year to the next. Any underspends in Audit Scotland's budget will be returned to the consolidated fund.
That's interesting. Bear in mind what we're looking at for next year and your asks there. The increase, presumably, is consumed by the agreed, I believe, year 2 of the pay increase deal that was done of 3.8%. And does that include or exclude the national insurance contribution increase that I presume would not have been factored into your initial projections for 25-26?
Yeah, you're quite right. We had 4.2% was the second year of the 2-year pay deal that we agreed with our trade union partners 3.8% in the first year. And I think, as we've referred to in our proposal, that mirrors the arrangement that the Scottish Parliament reached with its colleagues. As I mentioned in my introductory remarks, the national insurance increase for employers clearly wasn't one we had anticipated as we'd compiled our budget. Again, I'll maybe bring Stuart and just see kind of why we've sought to ring-fence that rather than have make any assumptions, and primarily for transparency, but also the engagement that we've had from Scottish Government Finance, who we liaise with as part of the preparation and submission of Audit Scotland's budget that the Parliament considered in the round as part of the draft budget proposal.
And in doing so, I guess so you've obviously come to the table with a 10% increase ask overall, which is substantial, and therefore I'm trying to break it down into the constituent parts to make it easier to scrutinise. But a big chunk of that is the national insurance contribution, and I'm trying to get to a place why Audit Scotland felt that this was the mechanism to try and recuperate that money.
So you're right. Stuart can perhaps set that out. I think it'd be quite helpful, Mr Green, just about the engagement we've had with the Scottish Government, what feels like a live issue in terms of the negotiations and engagement between the UK Government and the Scottish Government, the extent to which that will be funded, either in totality or partly. So with that level of uncertainty, and until we have clarity, the view, and it's supported by our board, was that that should be kept as a separate item for engagement with the SCPA today. Funding, numbers-wise, the national insurance increase equates to an additional £520,000 on our cost base. Of course, we've got options. So in the event that the Parliament chooses not to support our proposal, our only other option would be that we reflect that in fee increases, or to the other side of the balance sheet is to reflect that in our cost base. So to do something differently in terms of how we deliver our audit work, to vary the pace and so forth. But at the moment, and again I'll bring Stuart, I think it's probably useful for the Commission just to hear about certainly not direction we've had from the government, but the steer of the engagement that we've had about how we kind of best reflect that in our proposal.
And sorry to interrupt, but when you do answer, I would really like to hear why you've chosen not to go down the fee increase route.
Yeah, purely, I think, from our perspective is a transparency perspective. It's quite easy. If we went down the fee route, it would be we'd have to increase the fees, obviously, and that would put what we've got in the report here up to about just under 3.5%. The fees would need to go up. So what we've got here is this approach that we've just gone through the board and the scrutiny was around what is the impact to Audit Scotland. Whilst the overall grand scheme of things, it's not a lot, it is to Audit Scotland. So it's a case of this is costing us more, and in respect of to Scotland as a whole, how much is the impact of the employer national insurance required? So if we were to absorb that in the fees, the bodies that we would be charging the fees to, they wouldn't be getting an uplift in their grant or their funding to cover this. So I would expect. So it's a case of that's the reason why for this year we took this route was basically to sort of say, well, this is an extra pressure and we really need to funding for that. And it's more of a transparent approach. This is how much the cost is going to be to Audit Scotland for this. And we feel that that's should be reflected in the funding, and that in my discussions with the Finance Directorate at the Scottish Government, they were content with that approach, obviously, that we were taking.
I mean, I think in your opening statement, Auditor General, you said that you audit 300 public bodies. I mean, £500,000 spread across hundreds of bodies wouldn't be a huge increase to them, would it? And does it not seem a fairer way of, because ultimately it's a pass-on cost, and again, there's a slight domino effect to all of this, of course, and we don't really know where all those are going to land in the next couple of months. But it's not like you're turning up at a local public authority and asking for hundreds of thousands of pounds per authority, for example.
So, so you're right. I mean, there are options. I think it's probably Stuart and I have set out. I think it's our preference that this would be funded from the consolidated fund, given the uncertainty of it all. There is additional complexity in that not all of the audits that we undertake are chargeable in terms of audit fees, so we have to map through all of those arrangements. I think we thought we'd got ourselves to quite a reasonable and stretching place, Mr Green, in terms of the core fee increase that we got to of 1.9%. That represented both a below inflation fee increase and also one that was, a good bit lower than where we had been in previous years. The Commission will recall in terms of fee increases for public bodies, and also lower than the pay award. So that recognising that quite stretching targets in terms of the efficiencies that we've touched on to an extent already. So in the absence of kind of clarity from Scottish Government, UK Government in terms of how this would be funded, Stuart's mentioned what it might mean, and there'll be the variability within sectors. We can't cross-subsidise within sectors. So not having that detail, this was our preference in terms of the funding model from the consolidated fund. But I wouldn't deny that there would be alternative options if that was the Commission's preference.
The work that is undertaken by audit firms, they will be incurring national insurance increase costs to their own staff as well. Is that factored into the increase that you've agreed with them, or will there have to be an over and above NIC increase in what you pay them too?
So Vicky might want to say more, but no, it's not our understanding that will be an additional fee for the audit firms. We have a 5-year contractual model with the firms that we appointed for the start of the 22-23 audit year, and the contract prices are inflated by Audit Scotland's pay award. So that will be 4.2%, and it will be for firms to reflect that or absorb that in their own cost base. The only slight caveat I would add, if it's helpful, is that the prices vary over and above for any other material changes, such if there's a new auditing standard that is required to be reflected. That might be something that we'd have to engage with the firms on, but it's not our understanding in terms of the employer's NI will be a separate addition.
There is something that struck me about that same table on page 12, and that's the staff projections. Please don't take this as in any way a criticism, but it jumped out at me. For years 24, 25, 25, 26, 6, 7, 7, 8, you've pretty much got the same amount of staff projected. That's very unusual in an organisation to have such certainty year on year. And I also question if it jumps out at somebody, and maybe it's a question for the board. Does that scream of efficiency and productivity improvements if it's simply the same amount of people? Is it the volume of work you suspect to be the same? Is it that because of the change of working hours you need more people to do more work? I'm trying to get my head around this. It strikes me as such an unusual forecast in a big organisation.
There's various factors, actually, so you're quite right. I'm sure a chair will want to comment on. I think Vicky has led some of the thinking, and you mentioned it already, in terms of our target operating model. There are a lot of variables in here, actually, and as sure has been mentioned, the opportunity to discuss further about the audit modernisation approach. Part of that, not the first phase, but we expect that the application of artificial intelligence will change how we deliver our audit work. We're seeing that in the wider profession already. Audit Scotland's already adopting aspects of audit automation. And I think we've spoken with the Commission previously about our ability to look at vastly increased amounts of transactions. So whilst we still sample test, we still have auditors who will be going out testing samples of transactions, we anticipate before very long, and indeed in some audits already, that we're able to drill down across a population in a way. So I think this is our best estimate, Mr Green, about kind of where our people requirements will be. What's quite a short term, 27, 28 isn't terribly far off for us, and it only really takes us up to what will be the first year of the new audit appointment arrangements. Before bringing in Vicky first and then Colin, the other variable is that the number of bodies that we audit is changing. So in this year, we're going to be the auditors of at least 2 new public bodies. So Zero Waste Scotland is coming to us, and one we heard yesterday is the Scottish Pubs Adjudicator, Scottish Pubs Code Adjudicator, a small body, but you know they all still require an audit. Still, so I think what the numbers here are suggesting is that perhaps probably another emphasis on productivity to an extent we can absorb, you know, through the efficiency in some of the models that we have. So hopefully that's helpful as a starter, and maybe turn to Vicky first and then Colin.
Thank you. I was going to bring up that point that we want to sort of relatively high level flatline, recognising actually there's growth in demand for what we do, and we're not wanting to be linear. As more bodies we audit, we're trying to keep that cost base down. And I think the high level whole time equivalent would be a bit crude assessment, because actually what we're doing is in looking at our target operating model, linked to our business plan, we might replace a more senior post with a junior post, and actually pivoting where we have our workforce. So it's linking in with our business planning, and I think that's the way where we want to get to. And as the audit modernisation project develops, the skills that we need are different. So we might need maybe less auditors, but maybe more data analysts in some areas. So I think going forward, where we want to get to is actually break that down at different levels, different grades. We've got that information in terms of our target operating model of where we want to be, but that is very much linked in with our audit modernisation, because the world is changing, like every organisation, but we want to be on the front foot and look at what our skill set is as well.
I think that's the cue for me to state with the board, isn't this? In some ways, Vicky has covered off a number of the points, but although we've got essentially a flat number for staffing, what they will all be doing over the next period of time is moving, in that I think as the committee is aware, the audit modernisation programme has a number of staff members who are on that project in terms of delivering the project. One could see a situation at the end where you would repeat the question, say, well, what are they going to do going forwards? But the reality of the change of all of this is that there will be an ongoing level of change which we manage to enhance the efficiency of the audit. The real point being is that the board are driving to have more productivity, they're driving to have more efficiency, but they're also very conscious that there's a moving feast in terms of the number of audits being done, the complexity of audits that are being done, and the public's appreciation or request of what an audit should comprise. So there's a need to combine all of those in a changing world. So I think in some ways you can take the numbers of the staff numbers as you've done and say, how can that be static? We can do exactly the same and say how it could be static, but then to deviate from that, one would have to predict, say, 24 months ahead and say, well, we think we'll be needing more people or we're needing less people. And the point that Vicky was making about the staff mix, that if you look at the profession, what is actually, or the private sector rather than the profession, what I think over time they're seeing is that actually they need more people at a more senior level to discharge the work, because there are more judgments being made. So the changing model over time will change. That needn't necessarily reduce the cost, because you'll have more expensive people who are better skilled to make the judgments that are now being called upon. So I think what your absolutely correct observation suggests is that we're dealing with a moving situation. This is a best guess over a relatively short period of time in terms of flat, and it will be constantly reviewed by the board, because we're keen to see more efficiency going forwards. Why do I say that? Well, I think that's one of the benefits of having the non-execs there. They're quite hawkish about it. They're very supportive, but they are, I think, quite hawkish.
Good, so they should be. No, that's very helpful. I appreciate there there are a number of moving parts to that, and I guess it's that complexity which makes it difficult to then take a snapshot on a budget ask in the way that it's presented. Now, I think perhaps for future years it would be helpful to get a snapshot of those moving parts, to see where, you know, for example, the average salary is changing, where you get a feel for how the relativity between number of people and how much it costs. Because effectively what you're doing year on year is coming back and asking for more money for people. But that seems to be off the back of annual pay rises as opposed to fluctuations in the types of people you have or the number of people you have. And then, of course, the other side of that is marrying that up with the type of work that you're doing and the implementation of automation and AI and so on, which I'm looking for a bit more of a medium-term strategy, I suppose, rather than just this annual snapshot that we seem to be getting. So, but that's maybe for another committee session, another day. So, modernisation has been mentioned a few times already, and I'm glad, because I did want to talk about that. I have a very specific question on this year's budget ask, because in your 10% year-on-year increase, apart from the national insurance contribution, the biggest chunk of that is, of course, your audit modernisation request of £672,000. Why is that, just a simple one to start with, why is that a people cost? We were of the assumption that would be a cost to a consultancy, an agency, or software, or development work, or some form of, you know, pre-implementation cost. But it seems to be people. You've got it down as a people line in your budget. Why is that?
So maybe I just clarify that. I think the 672,000 is to meet the development and implementation costs of the replacement audit software. What we also sought to do, Mr. Green, in terms of the submission to the Commission today, is perhaps, as you kind of mentioned in your earlier question about where is this going in terms of costs and impact, is that so you know, I do say this is best estimate, because inevitably, as you go through what we think is going to be quite a complex IT project, is that, you know, with the right level of programme management, which is part of our costs to deliver this, we've got the right skills to bring in to kind of make what's going to be Audit Scotland's probably most fundamental change programme in the past 10, 15 years, is we've got the right skills to support the implementation of it. And what we look to set out in the budget submission is where we think that's going to go, both the 672,000 for 25-26, will be a further 1,544,000 across 26-27 and 27-28. I'm looking to colleagues, just in case anybody wants to come in on the 672,000 to broaden out. Vicky, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, there are revenue costs. We're not going down a capital project that we're buying. It will be the licensing costs for the development of what we are doing. The people costs are largely being absorbed within our budget, as Colin had said about us pivoting some of our resources. So it is very much linked into the costs of working with the other national audit agency and procuring their software and putting in the implementation of where we are. But it is revenue, it's not capital.
Right, so essentially what you're saying to us is that your current estimate of the modernisation project is about 2.2 million. That's a sort of fag packet analysis. And you're splitting that over 3 financial years, the first tranche being 670 ask in this year's increase, with an expectation of 1.5 over 2 years in the next 2 years' budgets. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And how reliable is that? Because we, you know, with the greatest of respect, public bodies don't have the best track record in forecasting budgets for software and modernisation projects. Because what I'm concerned about is that it's a big chunk, £600,000 in this year, but you know, are you loading it towards the end of the project? And what we'll find is in a year or two is you're coming back asking for £2 or £3 million because the whole thing's just gone balloon in cost.
I think given the organisation that we are, and that we have reported many times over the years on unsuccessful IT projects in other public bodies, we are very alert to that risk. and do not want to find ourselves in the place where we haven't successfully anticipated what the cost might be, or the timescale drifts, we don't have the expertise. So hopefully you can be, and it may be helpful to set, I suppose, some of the safeguards that we have so that we don't find ourselves in that place. So we have assurance arrangements both through the board. We have what we're calling a strategic improvement board that oversees the progress with the project. We've had an internal audit review of our arrangements, and we've also engaged the government gateway process, where they bring technical experts to assess our intentions, the pace, whether we've got the right. So we've gone through all those processes and suggest that our figures that we're presenting, the timescales, are robust. We've also following the Treasury guidance on the delivery of projects, and that captures what's known as do we have the right or wrong pitch in terms of optimism bias. You'll be familiar, Mr. Green, that many projects can assume they're going to be in one place, particularly the owners of the project, to get it over the line or to get it off the ground rather, will go to one place, but it doesn't transpire. So I think what we've tried to do is to capture all of these variables and risks, and to present them both to executive governance arrangements and our own Audit Scotland governance, that we are projecting in the right way. The last thing I'd say, and again Vicky might want to say a bit more, we think we've got some really strong certainty that our preferred model is to partner with the National Audit Office. So that's not leaving us at what could be the mercy of a tender exercise. So the engagement that we have with prospective suppliers can suggest one thing, but the tender price arrives and it's materially different. We broadly know what it's going to cost as we are engaging with the National Audit Office, who have been very supportive and accommodating. So again, if I may, just to express my thanks to the engagement we've had from the NEO so far. Vicky.
Thank you. Just Stephen's covered a lot of the governance that I would have mentioned. So maybe the only thing to add is we have got some certainty, because it's not a capital, we're not building it ourselves. So it's around software and licensing, and the NEO have been through all of that. So we do have a bit of certainty around that. I think the risk of what we have with this project, though, is the implementation timescales, and that's something that we want to closely monitor. Highlighted earlier that we cannot hold reserves or for funding projects. So I think we're relatively certain and confident around the totality of the funds over a 3-year period. It's what the risk will be is this monitoring. We're on track for implementing in the timescale and how those costs fall across the 3 financial years. But the gateway reviews are being really helpful in and they're being very positive, but equally usefully highlighting areas that we need to look at to ensure that we are on track.
Perhaps in the, I guess it's important to is not to look at it through the prism of a single year ask, because essentially, even though it's the first year of that 3-year spend, you're asking for sign off of the whole project essentially, even though the money's been spread out. So, we've talked a lot about what it will cost and how much it's going to cost and how much money you need to do it, but what we haven't heard a huge amount about is what comes out the other end of it. What are the savings involved? And we probably don't have time to go into all that today. So, but I'm just parking that out there, because perhaps what I would like to see is a breakdown, perhaps of the overall cost, and particularly the 670k for this year, to understand this terminology of resource versus capital and so on. But perhaps in doing so, that you could paint a rosier picture of why spending £2 million in modernisation will save money down the line.
So I'll maybe bring Chair in. I think he's perhaps keen to maybe set some of that out. We will present a clear picture. Actually, I'm very happy, Chair, to come back to the Commission in writing with some more detail on that, if you'd find that helpful, about the analysis of the anticipated cost for the audit modernisation project. Perhaps maybe just to manage expectations ever so slightly is that we don't have a strong or fundamental expectation that this is going to be, at its heart, a cash-releasing programme of investment. We think this is more about readying Audit Scotland for the future, so that we can, with what we believe, continue to deliver high-quality, impactful audit work on behalf of the Parliament and the people of Scotland. So as we talk, the further out we go, there are more variables that are coming in. So the pace of the development of technology, artificial intelligence and so forth, will likely mean, as you move 3-5 years into the future, that what we'd anticipated today could be different. And I think what we're seeing is this, and hopefully with the Commission's support, is that it brings us into a place where we can invest on an incremental basis in the technology in a way we just haven't done so. So if I can show you some of the systems that we're operating, they are end of life. So that it means that we're not equipping the people to deliver public audit with the tools that they need to continue doing so. And that requires manual interventions. Vicky's mentioned we're not getting the information that we need to run Audit Scotland in a way as efficiently as we would. And last thing before bring Colin in is that it's increasing our cyber risk at the same time with having a system. There is no panacea, of course. But I think one of the things that really attracted us to the NEO partnering arrangement is that they are readying that system so that it can be developed over time, so that it can have a bolt-on for artificial intelligence that allows us, we think, to move to a place where we've really been playing catch-up, the one that we can keep pace as we invest. But certainly very keen to share some of our underlying information with the Commission, and we'll gladly do so. But Colin.
Thanks, Stephen. It's a very difficult topic, actually, to cover. And Stephen, I know, volunteered that we come and attempt to do that at a different time in terms of the full scope. But the interesting piece from audit modernisation from the board's perspective is that there's a few strands to this. I mean, and it's going through Gateway just now, which I'll come back to. And it's also gone through an internal audit process in terms of how it's been procured. And we've also had an offline deep dive into AI, AA, best value in all sorts of different guises, which the board has been instrumental to ensure that it fully understands the issue. And one of the interesting bits about it, though, is because I've been, I think, somewhat unfortunately, I was #1 in the Gateway review recently, and I thought I was last, so I could sweep up, but in fact I had to be in the front foot. But the reality of it was that the single biggest risk in all of this is not the software. It's the process of change that will have to take place following its implementation, which is why there's a significant people part to it. Because we're changing entire ways of working, so that Stephen's speaking about obsolescence at the moment. As I understand the position, on a simple level, a previous year's audit cannot be used to self-populate the next year's audit on a whole heap of standing information. So there's significant scope within that, if one changes the way that practice takes place, to save time in setting up the next audit, which leads into Mr. Ruskell's comments about efficiency. So there are whole processes in that. But processes, by and large, need people to buy into them. And change in some quarters is welcome, in other quarters is not welcome. And one really has to deal with the not welcome, because you need the totality of colleagues to come through. So that's in part why, in some ways, the software part appears to be less costly than the people part, or less costly than the totality of the project. I think the other bit about it is the board's been very keen to ensure that we aren't doing this as a standalone purchase or development, which would be even worse, of software, in that we wanted to find working models which we could, if it made sense in procurement, partner with, so that they took the heat of the cost of the software, not us. And I think that if we can combine all of that with flexibility and AI and things of that, so I'm just touching on the AI part. I mean, there's a scope in this where the whole process of sampling in time will be done away with, and one can get to 100% review of transaction by using automated things. And then you can identify the exceptions. So you spend more time dealing with exceptions rather than dealing with the sampling, which in some ways should improve the quality, and that's when you need the judgment, which is where you begin to get the total change between somebody who's doing the sampling to produce a set of data to the data appearing, and then you're doing an interpretation of the data. So it's a complex project to get to that point over the next 2-3 years. And we're trying to get this, the board are keen to get this done faster than the team, because we don't quite see why it should take so long. So there's pressure to get it done quickly, but we're very conscious that you do it quickly and it falls over because of the reluctance to change, then we have to just moderate the pace to make sure everybody's taken with us and going through. Why do I take time doing this? Actually, because it's the background to how we have to distill down into a budget, and you take the lines and say, why is this and why is that? There's quite a lot of thought going on, which the board is essentially involved with, has done a number of deep dives, and has been through various committees, I think all in a pretty challenging way. At least I hope the team think it's been a challenging way, but constructively so. So we're fully committed to doing it because it will improve the audit product.
Much appreciated. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Can I bring Richard Leonard in?
All right. Yes, you can. Just to pick up a couple of loose ends from the previous 2 rounds of questions. First of all, of course, our job is to challenge. And so, for the record, not all of us believe in the inevitability of downsizing as an approach. I think you've described why there are times when you need to expand and reshape the skill sets that you've got. So I think your responses on that have been very, very useful for us as a Commission to understand what's happening with your overall staffing costs.
Well, thank you for that, Mr. Leonard. So, Mr. Green's pointed out quite rightly that we're anticipating, with the best information we have, given the volume of variables that we're operating with, a static people workforce in the organisation. But the variables are significant. So artificial intelligence may bring a downsizing, but it equally might, I think as the Chair mentions, it might require us to bring in different types of jobs. Vicky touched on data analysts and so forth. The pay and grading of these jobs to be confirmed, really, because what the market will dictate. Audit Scotland operates in a market where people can move quite well readily, so they are either into public bodies or into firms, so that we've got to pitch ourselves at the right point. The other variable that you may want to explore, and happy to do so, is what our roles and responsibilities are in public audit in the years to come. Climate change specifically might very well require a different contribution from Audit Scotland. As we moving into 2030s, 2040s, but the progress we're making towards net zero in the public sector in Scotland may require Audit Scotland to start to do different things. That will also be a further variable. So I think this is the best estimate for today that we're presenting to the Commission.
If I may add, we are actually in our workforce planning and target operating model in line with areas like climate change. We are looking to see if we need more specialists in certain areas. We know that some of the other audit agencies have done that. So also what we're looking is seeing where we can partner. So we might not need to bring in a specialist, but we've got some reciprocal arrangements. And I think the opportunity to, through our audit modernisation, of being linking in with the NEO, which are a much bigger organisation, there are opportunities to garner there. On our overall workforce as well, we take quite seriously our role as a public sector anchor institution as well. And we've been increasing our modern apprentices within our budget as well. So there is quite a lot of pivoting within those numbers, and very happy, as Mr Green asked for, to give you more detail at future.
Thank you. That's again, that's really helpful to inform our decision making today, which is, after all, whether or not to agree your budget. The second point that I just wanted to pick up, following on from the questions Mark Ruskell was asking, and it's just an old trade union organiser thought that went through my head. Do any of the staff you employ work on contracts that provide for them to be paid overtime?
We don't pay overtime as an organisation. I think, as Vicky mentions, really probably for at least 20 years we've had flexible working, and flexi-time has been the model with which people can claim back time that they've worked beyond their contracted weekly hours.
Okay, that's fine. Just when we were talking about potential exposure to risk and the importance of us challenging the model that you're describing, I just wanted to understand that. But that, again, that's a very categorical reply. That's
And if you're happy with me to develop ever so slightly,
Yep.
I think one of the things that we've been really focusing on as an organisation across the piece is striking the right balance between delivery and well-being. You know, it's been a recurring theme probably for the past 5 years or so, especially pandemic times. We look really closely at annual leave and flexi balances. As a management team, we've had a couple of steps just to really encourage that people get the right balance, that they use their annual leave, they're not accruing significant flexi balances that become unmanageable. That, notwithstanding Vicky's well-made point, is that the management information that we have isn't brilliant. So, you know, we look really closely at that, and what we've seen is a real downward trajectory over the past year of a reduction in unused annual leave and lower flexi balances too.
good. Pleased to hear it. Let me move on from staffing issues onto other areas. And you've got a section in the submission that you've brought to us today headed up Other Operating Costs. And you itemise in there what you call the main areas of movement. But I think by movement you mean increase. And I just wanted to probe a little bit into some of those areas that you've highlighted. So, for example, you talk about the resource system implementation. And forgive me if you've covered this earlier on, but in with a different descriptor. But could you perhaps, first of all, tell us a little bit more about what that is and how that's been, what that work is and how is it being delivered? Is it being delivered in-house? Is it externalised? Are you bringing in people to do that through an outsourced model? But if you begin by telling us what it is, that would be helpful.
Well, delighted to do so. So I think this is our organisational response to, I think, the topic we just touched on, that we don't have good enough information. We don't have the necessary tools as an organisation to deploy people on audits, effectively what it means. So somewhat regrettably, we're still using spreadsheets as an organisation with which to allocate people and individual teams to different audits. We've known about this as an issue to resolve for many years, but never quite got it off the ground as to get the right solution. For the past couple of years, we've been engaging with other audit agencies in the UK, speaking to audit firms about where we can learn and find the right solution for Audit Scotland. And we've created a project, again, under the banner of some of our internal governance to give it the right structure and scrutiny. And where we've got ourselves to is looking to procure a system to support the delivery of how we better deploy, again, as part of our productivity and efficiency thinking in the organisation. So again, Vicky might want to say a bit more, actually, because we're at a pivotal moment in this project with, and perhaps set out, I think, you know, that some of it we're in the throes of kind of contracts, so there may be some boundaries that we're able to set out for the Commission this morning, but the intention, Mr Leonard, is that Audit Scotland equips itself with a system that we can deploy people much more efficiently and successfully than we're currently able to do so.
Thank you. This is absolutely complementary to our audit modernisation. I think we're treating it as a separate project just to manage it in the enormity of audit modernisation. But currently, and I think we've raised this before with the Commission, that our cost information is on audit days. How many days does it take to deliver an audit? Now, the cost of a day of an audit director is very different from the cost of a day of an audit junior. And to get that information, which is so important, of understanding cost of audit, charging, there's a lot of manual interventions required. And therefore, when we get the information, there's quite a lag time. So we want a system linking in with our people system and our flexi system of getting the information where we can set a budget for an audit and then be very clear what the resource allocation is. And we want that at the moment. It is an audit director's time is involved in allocating staff across to audits, which is we believe is quite inefficient. And so we want a system that will do it. So this is a very much a spend to save. We'd written to the Commission before that looking at the pension reduction that we had in the budget, that would fund this project for 3 years. But after that period of time, whilst we will have ongoing licensing costs, they would be self-funded through the efficiencies of staff taken away to fund this ongoing project. So we very much see it as a spend to save that's necessary for efficiency.
So, and you've got systems in place to make sure that it is delivering value for money. Yeah, some kind of governance system that's sort of got oversight. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is one of the 2 or 3 projects that we're running, audit modernisation being the other largest one, and it is subject to ongoing scrutiny by what we're calling our Strategic Improvement Programme Board, regular reports on progress. Our Audit Scotland Board is informed of that too. So yeah, we think we've got the right oversight of the project. Most fundamentally of all is value for money, and that with the right rigour will not progress with a project, regardless of how tempting it is, if it's not going to deliver value for money.
Okay, thank you. Let me move on to another area which crops up in that other operating costs section, and that is an expectation that certainly over the last, compared to 2 years ago, you're looking at a significant increase in legal fees. Well, I mean, could you again explain perhaps the occasions that Audit Scotland requires to procure legal support externally? What areas do you take legal advice on?
I'm happy to start on that. Actually, Stuart might want to say a bit more about how we go about doing that, the type of circumstances beyond my own thoughts. So, as auditors, we work in a legislative environment. So we often have to explore whether a piece of legislation applies to a public body, whether they have complied with it. And at times that rubs up against the boundary of our own expertise, so that we will take guidance about our roles, responsibilities, our powers. Sometimes, very specific examples, we'll take guidance on particular parts of the Act that governs ourselves. Our access to information can be a pinch point at times, so we've taken advice on that. The other aspect of some of our legal and professional is that in years, and maybe see it in forward projections, the work that we do in the National Fraud Initiative will be captured under this broad heading of legal and professional fees as well. So probably a bit of a general reflection, Mr Leonard, but that it is a feature of our work at times that we need to bring in the advice of others. So I think that's fair, Stuart, and you want to add?
Not really. We do have a legal framework where we have 4 legal firms that we deal with. So what we would do is we would put the work out to them, and it does vary as well, because we will need guidance in respect of, for example, the estate strategy. We need the guidance in respect to leases and contracts there, as well as HR issues we will ask advice for as well. So there are multiple things, as well as the audit side of things. There is the operational, the core things that we would need them for. What I would say as well is that is in professional fees. In addition to that, there is we have an occupational health contract, so that's for due for renewal, and that's related to the staff contractor well-being. So we have that as an external support provided as well. So this is just a natural increase as part of the contracts that we work with.
Maybe bring Martin Walker in. I think he wants to come in at this point too.
Yeah, I think just a couple of other things that's worth noting as well. First up is, given that we're a relatively small organisation, we don't have in-house experts in certain fields, so we do not have a legal team. You know, we don't have lawyers employed directly by Audit Scotland, and so all of those legal services are drawn down from that contract arrangement that Stuart mentioned. I think the other thing is that in the projections for the year ahead, also we're bearing in mind a couple of the projects that we've just been talking about, and recognising when it comes to setting up memorandums of understanding, when it comes to setting up the licensing arrangement that we'll have around the audit modernisation project and so on, these are really important things to get right. And so part of the costs that we're looking at there is related to that kind of stuff as well. So it's, yeah, it's very much a range of different sources, as people have said, but I thought those were two other things worth mentioning this morning.
Yeah, no, again, I think that's helpful. Chair, my final question is about something which Stuart Dennis alluded to in passing, which is the estate strategy. I mean, one of the things which we've discussed in previous years in looking at the budget were the plans that you had to change, again, the distribution of your staff and where they work from and so on. And in broad terms, it was about reducing the headcount in Edinburgh and reducing your footprint in Edinburgh and having an increase in Glasgow. So the submission that you've given us tells us that that has netted savings overall. So I guess the question that we've got as a Commission is, are those savings still on track, and how is that estate strategy going?
So we're really pleased where we've reached. We have completed the project to modernise our estate in both the Edinburgh and Glasgow offices. As you rightly point out, we're about half the size we were in our Edinburgh office, and as it were, moved that capacity to Glasgow, both in the same office buildings, and that will result in efficiency savings of £281,000 over the course of the years to come. We think it's been a successful project for the organisation that gives us a state that allows us to be a flexible organisation. So, people are still working remotely, but our offices are being used appropriately when they need to. So we have got a change in the number of team meeting facilities than we had. So it's striking that right balance. So what we don't have is a desk for everybody, if everybody wanted to turn up. But I think that just reflects how we operate as an organisation. People are still working the length and breadth of Scotland, delivering public audits. We've retained our office in Inverness and the base that we have for colleagues in the North East of Scotland using facilities with Aberdeenshire Council. I think all of that is giving us the right modern facilities, but also really appropriately generating some cash efficiencies too.
Just on the positive, one of our key things is as a training organisation, we want to ensure that we bring staff in to be together, to learn from each other, and that has proved to be really successful, particularly in the Glasgow office. The demographics tend to be a bit younger through in the west of our staff complement, so it actually and also probably more on the financial audit side. So teams are coming in together and they've got a really good space to do that, which we feel is really important part of people's work experience and training for learning.
Apologies, should have mentioned this. I think it also maybe speaks to the point Mr. Ruskell raised earlier about how we are projecting to, showing there's a physical investment in the environment that people are working in Audit Scotland. So I think it's going to serve us well for people who are already with us, but also to show to prospective future hires that this is an organisation that will continue to invest both in the training and development and also the learning and just the general work experience that people get.
Okay, thank you very much. No more questions from me. Go on.
Thank you. Just one or two quick questions to wind up on. In paragraph 41 in your paper, which I think is page 9, you talk about a partner, another UK public audit agency. Who is that agency?
National Audit Office.
National Audit Office. So you're going to propose to use their audit software as part of the modernisation process?
Yes, that's correct.
Now, presumably the bulk of that cost will be in, well, you'll have some software development, although you say there's minimum system requirements. Where will the data reside?
So, I guess, firstly, you're right, it's mostly going to be software licenses. We were very clear that we didn't want to go down the route of developing the system ourselves. I think that brings enhanced risk, additional cost, timescales. Martin mentioned about some of the advice we're taking just to make sure that, albeit we have very good relationships with the National Audit Office, we're partners with them in the Public Audit Forum, but this is still a commercial transaction, so make sure we get the contracts are properly structured, the memorandum of understanding is drafted effectively too, and part of that covers the data. The most important thing, and Vicky might want to talk about is that Audit Scotland meets its obligations. So we will control the data for the audits that we are undertaking. So we'll have, yes, we will own that. We also have data retention obligations as a public body. We must retain data and audits for 7 years into the future to ensure that we are meeting that. So we'll make sure that all of that is properly reflected, not just in the custom and practice, but also the legal underpinnings too, Chair.
There is, to safeguard against that, we're not, whilst we're using the NEO system, and they have, in terms of our costs, all their sunk costs that they've invested in developing the system, they're not passing on to us. They're recognising it's part of the public sector. But we do have, there's this third-party provider that we are working with for the of taking that system and implementing it into Scotland. So it'll be a licensed system, but it will be our own system that we are using in conjunction if we procured it from someone else. We have got that third-party arrangement, and we can provide more detail on that, but it's not going to be a case that the NEO hold and own all of our data.
Does the licensing arrangement include upgrades? Because NEO won't be standing still. They'll be upgrading their system constantly. Do we benefit from that?
Absolutely. That was one of the key attractions to this, that this is a system that is going to evolve. Touched on artificial intelligence, for example, that Audit Scotland can move at the same pace or a pace that's appropriate to us through the system development and implementation. In terms of your last point, Chair, actually, just for absolute clarity, is that much like all new systems these days, this will be a cloud-based system, so we're not investing in significant, I probably touched on Mr Green's line of questioning, of new data servers and so forth that will store the information, but the access, the security of it is clear in that. And again, we're very keen to come back to you with any more detail in writing if you find that helpful.
As far as the licensing is concerned, is there going to be a contractual period? Is it going to be for 5 years, 10 years? How do you envisage that working?
So I think Vicky might want to say a bit more about kind of the specifics of the contractual arrangement that we're still working through. But the reason that this is attractive to us, as I've mentioned, is that this allows us to move at a pace of evolution over the years to come. So we've set out in today's proposal of investment over a 3-year period. But I hopefully can be clear with where we think we're moving with the Commission is that having gone through a period for many, many years of not investing in our digital estate to deliver our audit work, I think it is a more reasonable position or expectation that this will be a period of perhaps ongoing investment, maybe not to the scale that we're setting out in the next 3 years, but as we move into, to that modern public audit provision, is that we'll need to continue to invest in our IT capability in a way that we haven't done in years gone by. Vicky?
What other systems did you evaluate?
So Vicky might want to set that out for the committee, but we looked at a range of alternatives. We engaged with a number of providers in this environment and assessed those with the criteria about their functionality, their cost and so forth before arriving at our preferred option of partnering with the National Audit Office. Some of that I'm perhaps not able to get into the detail, Chair, in public session today, but we'd be happy to share that as appropriate with the Commission.
Thank you. Yes, so the team looked at a lot of options. We engaged with the other national audit agencies, not just the NEO, but also with some of the private sector firms. And the Big Four, for example, invest a lot in globally, they develop their own. And we were quite clear with the board at the start that going down the route of developing our own system was quite a risky approach because of the ongoing developments that the costs involved. The NEO in developing their own system took numbers of years and have spent millions on doing that. So we felt that work has been done, and that was why it was attractive joining in with them. We couldn't join in with one of the Big Four firms. That they wouldn't be able to do that. But also, so then the other option was off the shelf packages, and they don't really lend themselves to the needs of public audit. Of where we were. So there was a lot of investigation work undertaken by the team, reporting it to the board around the options, and that's why the board agreed to go with the NEO.
Thank you. Just another question on the same page, actually, paragraph 48. I'm always a bit nervous when I see that savings are made by reducing the contingency budget. How big is the contingency budget?
In the current financial year, the contingency budget is £500,000.
You've halved it.
Indeed. You may remember, Chair, that with the support of the SCPA, Audit Scotland increased its contingency budget around the time of the COVID-19 pandemic, given the volatility of the environment that we were all operating in, and that we're not able to hold reserves and so forth. It gave us sufficient buffer to deal with unexpected matters that came our way during the course of the financial year. I think probably just given where we are in the cycle now is that halving it, whilst it increases our risk, I'm clear on that, it also feels like it's an appropriate step so that we're just clear on top of our cost base what efficiencies that we can offer. And that's the proposal that we've come to today to reduce it by half.
I guess if I'm being very simplistic, you asked for an increase in the contingency budget, which you received. Now you're offering half of that back as a saving.
So Vicky can say a bit more. I think moving to £250,000, I think broadly reflects where Audit Scotland had been over the longer term. Chair has been a more reflective of the contingency that we need to operate, given how we are structured financially. So, we cannot run a deficit in any year. That there is a degree of volatility about the progress of our work, the work in progress, our income recognition that goes alongside that. So, it feels like it's the right broad context for us. And Vicky, maybe you want to say there is a pay dynamic to this too.
Yeah, I think the contingencies really helped us over the larger contingencies really helped us over the recent period when we've seen more volatility and where pay settlements have been and annualised and not quite knowing and they've been above inflation. I think we felt more comfortable. Don't get me wrong, I'd like to have a larger contingency, but reflecting on where public services are and us wanting to ensure that we're playing our part in that as well, we felt we could absorb some of that risk because we have settled ahead of the year. We know we've got a 3.8% pay increase, which is built into the budget. Previous years when we've come back to you, we've just had assumptions in the budget around pay, and we've used the contingency to absorb because we've settled above budget in those previous years.
Okay, just one last question here. Coming back to the audit modernisation project and how it's paid for, all audited bodies are going to benefit from a successful rollout of the audit modernisation project. But why has Audit Scotland not shared its overall resource requirement for 25-26 across all the audited bodies? There is an argument by not doing so that that central government and sponsored bodies are cross-subsidising other parts of the public sector's audit fees. And that's something I know that you're very conscious of, and in the past we've had discussions about avoiding that.
Yeah, I'm glad you raised this, Chair. Vicky might want to come in on this. I think you're absolutely right. We are clear, and indeed the legislation such that we do not cross-subsidise between different sectors. I think this was a theme of discussion with the SCPA in previous years when we looked at some of the fee increases and how we arrived at those. Longer term, the benefits will evolve and change. I think, broadly speaking, we're not anticipating currently that the audit modernisation project will be a significant cash releasing programme. We will see, of course, that the pace of change may be such that it does bring a significant change to our cost base. But I think at the moment that we're adopting the right balanced approach, that modernisation will allow us to become a more effective, more impactful organisation, better respond to some of the changes in auditing standards and so forth. But again, I think that's broadly where I think our central premise is for the audit modernisation project.
I think the approach that we wanted to take with this, because this was a significant piece of discussion at executive team and also with the board, is the investment phase where there's a peak over the next 3 years required. We wanted to be clearly ring-fence that and transparent around those costs and asking for central funding. After that point, when it's just we've finished implementation and we're purely on the recurring licensing, we would want to build the cost of that into our core audit fee model. But it's just at this pump priming the investment bit. On the efficiencies, and again, as we said earlier, happy to provide more formally information on this. The trajectory of where audit costs are going is quite steep. It's quite a significant increase. So whilst we don't see significant cash savings going forward, what we're seeing is we're not going on that trajectory that we've seen the profession. It's already been talked about earlier, 9%, 14%, 150% in some ways. We're reducing the baseline in terms of where the costs are going. So we think after 3 years we'll be able to baseline that licensing fee, which would be included into fees, but for those 3 years of investment, we want to be transparent around the ring fencing and asking for central funding for that. But of course, as Stephen said earlier, like national insurance, there are different options that we could build it into fees now, but this was our preferred proposal coming to you today.
Okay.
I think, Jerry, just on that piece, that in a previous forum, it was succinctly put in a way that what we're doing, the first stage, is infrastructure, and as such, as part of the need to have First Audit Scotland to be able to service both the Scottish Government audits and the non-Scottish Government audits. Once we're through the phase, then the costs will be distributed amongst all the parties paying fees in the appropriate way. And the board's content with that.
Thank you. At this point, I'm conscious of time, but if members have a brief question that they want to come in with, Jimmy?
Thank you. It's one I was saving up for the issue around fees, actually. A third of your auditing is undertaken by external firms. I appreciate you have a multi-year deal with those and are obliged to increase, for them to increase their fees to you, which I think, if I'm not mistaken, is 4% this year. 3%.
Yeah, it's with reference to the Audit Scotland Pay Award as the uplift from 1 year to the next.
Okay, and this follows on nicely from the Chair's line of questioning on the pass-on of your uplift in fees, which is much lower than that for which you're being charged to do work by external companies. Can I ask what the strategy is around that, and if, for example, is there any risk that in future, given that there are a small handful of very big companies that perform the lion's share of this nature of audit work, that they may simply just not bid for future public audit work, given what might seem to them relatively low margins for such type of work, or the nature of the bodies that are required to audit? Is that a risk for you in future?
Yes, it is. This is a very live issue for us as we are moving into the next phase of public audit. So we operate generally in a 5-year cycle, whereby in addition to the underpinning legislation, the Accountants Commission and I produce what we call a Code of Audit Practice that sets out our requirements of auditors for public audit, and that goes alongside the procurement of audit services. We're starting the next phase of that programme, in fact, now just to look at what the future of public audit in Scotland will be, and of course we'll engage much more detail with the SCPA and the Public Audit Committee over the course of 2025. But I think there are signs, Mr Green, that the market for public audit in Scotland will become more challenging for firms in the years to come, drawing on, I think, some of the experience that we're seeing elsewhere in the UK, that some of the firms providing services to us currently have pulled out of other markets, for both for audit entirely and also for public audit. So I don't think we have the certainty in terms of providers or price yet. Of course, there's a fallback, and this is that Audit Scotland could do all of that work if it so wished. And that would require investment in terms of, and growth in the number of people who work for Audit Scotland. And we need to weigh all of that up. So we will absolutely be going through that rigorous process over the course of the next 12, 18 months.
Could Audit Scotland better support small or medium-sized auditing firms in Scotland that are more localised to the clients that they're working with and spread across your 4 geographic office areas? Because I think there are four very, very big international companies that are soaking up huge amounts of public money in this respect.
Yeah, both those points are true, actually. It's actually 6 providers that we operate with. So there are some medium-sized firms that we're currently we have appointed. Just to assure you, we actively sought to encourage additional bidders last time round from small and medium-sized accountancy firms. And if you've got time, I think the Chair might have a strong perspective on this. We will absolutely be doing that this time round as well. But I think what I would recognise is there are barriers to entry and there are opportunity costs in terms of providing public audit. You quite really home in on it. The price that we can pay for public audit can be matched and in some cases bettered by providing private audit services. So there'll be a trade-off. We want to cast our net wide. We want to, most fundamentally of all, marry up affordability and quality, and that will be the driver as we go forward with this programme.
I think, if I may, as Stephen had mentioned, the process of doing the next Code of Audit Practices has just kicked off, and the board are involved in that quite correctly. And there's some significant challenge going on, not in terms of hostility, but just in how we can slice and dice the whole audit market, because the perception is public audit is all public audit in terms of the rules and regulations. So that applies to a certain part of it. That in itself is quite a specialised piece, because there are completely different rules for the way the public audits account as opposed to the private sector. But within the portfolio of jobs, you go from banks to Scottish Water, which is a quasi-FTSE company, through to charities, and charities are another specialist area. So for Audit Scotland to expand into all those areas, you've got to then recruit the skill set to do it, and perhaps not have the amount of work to keep that particular sector fully skilled. And there is indeed, when I was attending one of the annual planning meetings, there is a trade-off, because there are skill sets which informally lie with the private sector and informally lie with the private sector. Both can actually come together to an extent quietly to exchange experiences and skills, so that it is not it's not a given that Audit Scotland can't do it, but I think there's a projection somewhere that would employ about another 100 people to be able to perhaps not do the work as well as parts of the private sector. So it's not a black and white situation, but it is one that's under review. And I think earlier the Auditor General was mentioning that, particularly in areas such as green auditing, there might be people out there, and there are those who are doing it, who might be even better skilled at doing a green audit than the conventional auditor type route, all of which is open for examination. I think that's the point. It is open for examination going forward as to how this is done.
Do any other members have a brief question they want to give? No? In that case, I'll thank Colin, the Auditor General, Vicky, Martin and Stuart for their evidence this morning, and we'll suspend the meeting for 5 minutes as we move into private session. Thank you.